Let's do it. So, well, let's go ahead and get started. For today, we've got 3 stories to cover, and I think I mentioned that in both Slack and Twitter. So, some really good progress to date, certainly on Upward. So, again, special shout out to Martin Hansen and others who've been helping James on things, really identifying, answering questions, helping with setup configuration. So, I expect he'll probably join us here in just a bit. But then, really teeing up some good progress on Vinya, some of which we're starting to see already again with Bar Green. Art, I know you're working on some things as well for that. But today we're going to cover more about the Vinya reference name and reference storefront there. And so for today, we've got order details, we've got the account or my account menu, and then we've got the search autocomplete, all of which are part of the community prototype that Salmia has gracefully gotten ahead on. And so these should be some fairly straightforward ones for us to cover. But as always, definitely want to get your feedback on level of detail and, of course, estimation as we get back on track. So without further ado, let's take a look at what we've got here for number 350. And so this is the implementation of order details for Vinya. And so this complements the purchase history story that we completed, and it's already in progress right now. And so the idea is when you see your purchase history, of course, you'd like to see more details around it. And so with regard to this story itself, it's based off of the prototype here from Salmia, both the details here, this top half, with what you see here, and then the bottom half, which what you see down here, that basically gives you, of course, a collection of items that are part of that order, and then various levels of detail around shipment, payment, and summary. So the link itself, of course, is going to be more informative, but I've just added some thumbnails in here just to help with folks on this one. But this is the interactive version. This is all for those who want to play around with it. But that is the link. Love it when back buttons are overridden. So give us a second here. And so with order details, this is really what we're trying to do. And in terms of the story, again, from a shopper standpoint, as a shopper, want to view details from an order placed on Vinya so that you can buy again, share, or review item in the future. And so the types of information that you would expect to see here are that all products themselves will be, hold on, we're doing audio on that, so.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
It's just out under the chair, and so I just wanted to.
Yep. So, as a shopper, I want to view details from an order placed on Vinya so they can buy again, share, or review item in the future. And so with this one, you would expect things like an order ID number, product details, of course, names, details, quantity, and price, some actions. On this one, explicitly have buy again and share. Share may be a stretch goal. We can certainly think about that in the future, but I think we discussed very early on that reviews are probably out of question, so we might want to have that as a placeholder. We can certainly discuss because the API, as Alex would say, is not quite ready for that one in terms of the ratings and reviews coverage on that one. So for this one, I think we would just look at making these parts functional, and we can talk about what a fallback looks like on that one. Of course, assumptions, it's going to be dependent on purchase history when that's complete, although there are some cases where you can come into here with, I believe, a order number and a zip code. So interested in possibilities there that might be independent. That would be certainly more agile. And of course, again, we just mentioned reviews themselves would be considered in the future. So here are the tasks. Again, I kind of put these together fairly quickly, but I want to get your feedback on this one. So the idea here would be to create an order details and a summary in a very unauthenticated state. That's certainly simple, more simple, and again, based on how things typically work in Luma, you can do so with the ID number and I believe, again, the zip code. So coming to this with those 2 parameters would be kind of step 1. Step 2 then gets into a more authenticated experience when you start getting into things that would be linked from, of course, an account, your Veronica Castellos and such. And so kind of one at a time, looking at the orders and the groupings. Once those are complete, then looking at the actions. Those are not as important as the details themselves. Once that's complete, then of course the shipments and the payment details, which should just be read versions of what we've already accomplished here in checkout to date. So, anyways, that is again in terms of a basic order details page. This is what we have. This is the visual for it that associates that. And again, just some of my initial thoughts here on how this could be broken up in phase, but as always, want to get everybody's feedback on this one before we declare this one ready for pickup. Yeah. Good. Excellent. So So what is everybody's thoughts? Any questions or any questions, concerns from this one as we take a look at this, or clarifications needed?
We're dealing with this one as a standalone right now, right? Not coming in from the product view of purchase history.
Correct.
Right, this is the
Correct. And in theory, we should be able to actually get to this page without, just as a test, if we make it independent, without purchase history. Ideally, you'd have it linked. We can actually come in via ID number and, again, I believe a zip code. I'd have to verify that, which is kind of nice. So that would be simpler technically than authenticated. But if we can get authenticated right off the bat, perfect. So
would that be like just a page on Venya where, locate an order and then you enter in information? Right. It's kind of like a search. Exactly.
For the purposes of a demo, I think we can enter the data in fairly manually, even via a URL that could be received upon, say, form. But then, again, for extra credit, if it's fairly easy to do this in an authenticated way, since purchase history is already in flight, that's great. So again, this is we've got options on this one, which is good. But we definitely need this one certainly as part of MVP.
Okay.
So good questions, though. Any other questions or comments on this one?
I've got some comments.
Yeah.
So if you were to scroll down some more on the shipping piece, there's like an extra header somewhere.
Yeah, so this is, sorry, Sami, for the purposes of making these more informative, I'm still getting some feedback on the ability for people to access that community link, so I just kind of put a snapshot in there today.
That's fine, I can update it.
Yeah, so these are two screens of the same thing, so yeah.
So on the shipment details, I just wanted to discuss the track order button. Now, I've seen that even if an order has been delivered for a while, for a certain period of time, the shipping service or whatever it is, it still allows you to go to that page and it tells you that the order has been delivered. And after a while, the button exists in order history, but if you go, it gives you a 404, or it says, the delivery information could not be found or something on UPS's website or USPS, whatever it is. So I wanted to discuss if we should follow that model where we always show track order and based on what that endpoint is, it goes to that, or do we remove it after, let's say a week after delivery or something like that? I mean, do we set a timer on it and say, this is not trackable technically anymore, so do you move the button or disable it or whatever the case may be?
Right. So that brings up actually maybe even a deeper question, which is, for the first pass at MVP, do we maybe even have this, right? And so you think about the whole process for MVP. I think in an ideal world where you have a fully functional set of shipping and, at this point, this would be a manual transaction. Someone from Venya's typing in, that UPS number, that DHL number behind the scenes during fulfillment of this. And so theoretically, this is fairly manual. So we could say that track order is maybe only shown or even there if something is actually placed there, but we also, I think, need to account for the use cases that you mentioned as well, which is, X amount of days post-shipping. I'd love to explore that a little bit more. I still think there's value in having even for a say amount of time on things, but I don't know enough about the limitations across carriers, across that, because I still think for bookkeeping purposes, you might want to know where that was. And that, who knows, I would rather have it than not. But if it is producing actual 404s or situations like that, that's not super valuable as well. And so
no, it particularly helps if they lost your order and the link is still active after they said it was delivered, but it wasn't delivered to you. This has happened to me a few times.
Yep.
Where you're able to kind of say, hey, it tells me that you delivered it here, that's not where I live, and so on. Or where did you get this address from? But beyond that, I think if for a successful order delivery path, there's not much value in it going to a 404, and I don't know that people would even, I think once they receive their package, they wouldn't ever go back.
All right. I would say for the purposes of this, and if we want to get this within the constraints of a sprint or so of work, let's consider some of that in the future. I think there's a lot for us to kind of dig into from a discovery standpoint, and then we can quickly fast follow. Basically, that's just an additive experience once that's ready for that, much like reviews for that one. So I'm actually okay with relaxing the track order for the purposes of an example storefront. But let's dig in and see where that goes. We might want to come back as maybe a short, 1 to 3 pointer after this one once we have a little bit more information about that.
So do you want me to leave it in the mock-up and we'll address it later, or do you want me to update the markup without the button and just have static information for now?
I'd being sensitive to every little change on some of these, I would be okay with just making it a notation like this.
Okay.
And so as far as our acceptance criteria, it wouldn't expect this. And then who knows, maybe somebody will surprise us in the process. But I would like to handle it separately based on some of those conditions. Again, just trying to keep this. In an ideal world, we'd be looking at like 1, 3, 5 pointers. This one may be a little bit more sizable potentially. I'll leave it up to you to the audience here. But then track order, I think, is just kind of on its own something that could be added afterwards. But not to, I'd rather, for the purposes of not having multiple arcs on our prototype, we would come back around and just make notations on the things that might be stretch goals for that. So
okay.
We only have one Salmi on the project, unfortunately, and so we can certainly talk through that as it comes up for whoever picks this up. So, but it's a good call out, though. I think that's probably the easiest way for us to go on this one.
Cool. I have one more.
Of course.
So this doesn't apply to a fashion vertical, or maybe it does, I don't know, but it certainly does for household goods, where you may want to place an order in its entirety again. Right now, all we're doing is we're allowing an item by item buy again.
Right.
Do we need to consider an affordance for purchase this entire order again?
For the purposes of an MVP storefront, I think no.
Okay.
I personally think that's even as an item by item situation, that's a fairly low use case, certainly in terms of demonstrating a PWA. And so I think I think it's helpful and it's a nice to have, but I think for the purposes of this one, I don't think we need to worry too much about that. But it's a good question. I think it is something we'd want to research, understand the value of that.
Right.
And I think that's actually going to be a really interesting one as we look to the B2B theme next year.
Yeah,
because that's going to be a much bigger play. So, but probably not for this one. So. Yeah,
I mean that's what I figured, and that's why I left it out, and I didn't take it into consideration. But I just wanted to make sure that you were okay with that.
I am peachy keen with that one. So perfect. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Not from me.
Excellent. Sorry, guys. As you can see, I'm just adding some notation so we don't forget. So, all right. Well, you guys know what the next question is going to be, which is estimates. So let me update the notes on this one. How do we feel about this one? What's the size? What are we thinking about this one? A 1 pointer?
I came in kind of late, but just by looking at the tasks, I would say a 5.
Likewise. I don't think it's a 1.
Hey, Paul, how are you, sir?
Good. I'm alone today.
I see that. Excellent. All right. I think let's go with 5. Any notion to make that smaller or larger? Should we hit the gavel and call it so?
This is the sound of a gavel.
All right. Sound of the gavel. There we go. Done. 5. Perfect. Sorted then. Thank you, everybody. That was easy. All right. So let's switch gears. This one should be equally as straightforward, I hope. And so again, you guys keep me honest on this one. I've been away for a couple days, but as I'm looking at what's being built, one of my personal desires is to be able to sign out and potentially link to other areas of the Venya storefront. So I put together, again, based on the prototype that's a little bit further ahead from Salmia, the ability to access an account menu for Venya. And so it's part of a larger menuing story per se, but when I think about what needs to happen around here, clearly there are going to be some stretch goals here around rewards, potentially even notifications at this point, maybe even lists. So we can have those as placeholders, but now we've got the beginnings of purchase history. Profile is going to come at some point. That might be something we groom next week, but certainly a sign out, purely just from a testing standpoint, I think we need to have that to kind of go between authenticated and unauthenticated modes for things. And so I'm hoping this is a pretty straightforward one, but it's an important one as we start to flesh out some real scenarios and again testing to identify some of those future scenarios. So this one again is just an extension of the menuing and navigation for Venya to build upon some of the great work from Paul and team at Bargreen, where we have that existing setup there, but then making this a little bit more a little bit more robust with giving us a sign out as part of things. So that's the overview. And again, this is a snapshot of the prototype. If you click here, you'll see the interactive form of the exact same thing. And then from a pure story standpoint, as a shopper, I want to be able to access profile, purchase, wish list, and settings from Venia, including sign up, so that I can manage my accounts in the future. Again, basics will include customer name and email address, which we've already got currently in our example, but also access to these things like certainly purchase history and of course sign out as well. So assumptions themselves is we're going to assume that you have an account created. That's done. That's good. We're also going to assume things like rewards and points. Again, if you remember where our phasing is, I would love, yeah, of course, that would be great to have from day one, but those won't be available for quite some time, so we'll want to stub those out. But this is where they will exist from that. So those would just be either, we can decide to either remove them entirely or just kind of, again, stub them out for future consideration. Samia.
Hello.
Yes.
Just wondering if we want to start or swap out profile for security settings. The security settings is probably where they would change a password.
True.
Profile would be more, preferences and, that kind of thing, and their name, and we can have some basic information in there, but
Yep.
I feel like security settings, because we're doing the create account and the sign in and the forgot password,
Right.
it could be more important potentially than profile.
I agree, actually. Let's say, so I know one of the things that we're working on is some validation of this with some feedback. My guess is that if we were to ask 5 people in security settings, we might get several different answers in terms of what their expectations are. Now, if you start to say this is where passwords and other aspects are covered, that makes more sense. But I think we should give ourselves the option to either reconcile or take a look at what this might be in an MVP fashion, because we may not have both or all of those areas per se. So
one suggestion that I might have then is to get rid of security settings and make profile account settings.
Yeah.
And then have the password in there as well, along with some basic name and email information.
Yep.
So essentially sort of a static version of the create account form.
I like that. I do like that. What does everybody else think? I'm going to make sure that this is representative of the full audience. All right.
Huh.
We'll take silence as consent on this one, but I will say.
So I guess just representing the interests of Anton and the business value emphasizers here. Like, what is the story for what a user can do with this MVP now that they couldn't before?
Sign out.
Okay. Good enough for me.
That's the biggest thing, and then so being able to sign out is the biggest, and then also being able to efficiently access purchase history. So.
All right.
My hope and prayer as a product person that this is an easy one that will help us stitch this one together. So there's definitely business value in signing out for security reasons. So.
Sure.
And profile to be merged with as. All right, cool.
I will make note of that, and I'll make that change to the markup and update the prototype.
Excellent. And then I'll do the same thing. I think I overlooked notifications. Of course, I would love to see notifications. And I think that's a stretch goal to get it done, but I'm not sure if we will have that for something that we could reference inside of this for the first iteration. But we'll get there. Very good. So these are the assumptions. It's dependent, of course, on account creation. Rewards points not part of MVP. Notifications not part of MVP. There's going to be a UX update to the prototype where we're starting to consolidate a couple things, which I think makes sense. And then the tasks themselves are making sure that we've got a very, very basic menu with at the very least, as we just discussed with James, allow for sign outs, and then implementing links to profile and purchase history. And so we've now basically called profile account settings. And then within this process, being able to identify considerations for rewards, notifications, lists, and settings. So I don't know if that's as important, but for this story to be mindful of those when those come around in the future. And that's more of just a hope than a task. And then, of course, looking out for Mr. Calcaben, as always, testing and documentation as appropriate. So, that's what we got. Any other questions, comments, or concerns on this one?
No, sir.
So this isn't dependent on the My Account stuff. It's just placeholder links, right?
Odd. I'm trying to think about that in terms of how these are being stitched together. It's depending on you being authenticated. So I've seen that in the current builds that I've been able to produce. And so you have to be authenticated to access this. But you don't necessarily, and so simply just signing out would be all you need. But then the rest of this, I think, get into what we're talking about on the account settings. So being able to link to that once that's ready. That's, again, as I'm thinking through that, that's probably how that would go. But I'm open to feedback. I may have missed something.
So in locale, we're that.
The way I'm interpreting this is that it's just sign out. So basically, like, clear the sign in token and then clean up the sign out, the signed in stuff.
Sorry, I can't exactly follow what you're saying. The sound is a bit garbled on our end. Could you repeat that?
Sorry about that. So this is pretty much just like clear the sign out token from the local storage and then basically like do some cleanup for, you know, all the signed in stuff that might have gone into Redux.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. There we go. Any other, and so I just, Paula just added the token piece on that for local. I think that's a good point on the technical aspects of that. So anything else? Any other questions, comments, concerns?
No, sir.
No, sir.
All right. You guys know what is next.
Oh.
Oh, all right. What shall be the estimate? What are we thinking?
I'm thinking this one's pretty easy. It's probably a 3, if not a 1.
I was just gonna say I think it's a 3.
All right. I second that third or 3. Excellent. No, I think so. Yeah, if we can do this more, quicker than the 3, I think that's fine. This could, again, once the hood is open on this one, there may be some funniness with the token, a little bit of layout maybe here with the branding, but yeah, I think I'm hoping that the intent for this one is to be a quick win to stitch together some things. That's all. So good. Excellent. All right, this one is sorted. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
Yay.
Excellent. And with ceremony, let's actually make sure that these are ready for starting as well. Exciting. All right, so last but not least, and so we've had some initial work here on search, and so this one is about, and this will probably take a little bit more time, but the idea here is that once you have a very basic search, of course you'll know that filtering and sorting would come next beyond that, but the idea of creating a story around autocomplete is going to be interesting, right? You've seen this in some of the prototypes. This is a fairly traditional search experience. So within this one, the idea is as a shopper, you want to be able to preview search results to help browse the products on the Venia storefront using basic keywords like hoodie, so you can make an informed purchase. The idea, of course, you would get a series of suggestions and then be able to go from that. And so this one, of course, is going to be dependent on any search. And so I've blocked this one on the search results itself. That needs to be done first. But then from there, the idea is that you would click on a magnifying glass like so, and that you'd be able to start a search for something like pants. So pants would then give you a series of suggestions. From those suggestions,
I've got a screen for that actually.
Oh, very good.
You want me to share?
Yeah, please. Let me stop sharing here.
Share.
Very good. This is the one I was hoping. Yeah, this is the one I was. Yes, perfect.
And I can remove the ratings piece from here.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is the idea, and so from from a shopper standpoint, being able to make that selection, this of course is starting to show you the beginnings of what that search results might look like. I think we would cap this at roughly 4. Sami's done a nice job of kind of looking at where that would be in a mobile view, and then what we do have to think about is product suggestions on this one, right? And so that's going to potentially think about a more sophisticated search than what we would have initially. for that one. I think for MVP, at the very least, just the top half itself would be great. I mean, if somebody wants to get us into suggestions, that's fine as well. But we might be able to split that into two iterations, where at the very least, being able to have just a text-only view to begin that, and then, which would again basically show you the query inside of a category, but then being able to allow you to select quickly into that search results page, which is a key dependency. I think that's what we'd be looking for in this particular story, as as Salmia real-time makes edits based on some of the scope we're talking about here. So, but that's what we're thinking. So let me take a look at the details itself on the story as we look through that. Again, for this one, they're making assumptions that product suggestions will be covered in a future sprint, so I did note that, so no ratings or reviews. Results themselves would continue to update with every keystroke, so there are keyboard considerations. The shopper would be directed to results with the selected phrase and category, and of course the tasks themselves would be basically discovery to understand the real-time and cached products from API with keyboard, implement autocomplete with the guidelines for the prototype, which we've got there, and then be able to link to the aforementioned search results, which would be ready upon completion of this. This is blocked by that, but this is the idea around it. And of course, we've added testing and documentation to this one. So that's the idea at a high level. I know from a technical standpoint, this does get a little bit more interesting for this one, but again, thinking about what we need for this one, the idea and kind of the business value on this one is to be able to kind of have a look ahead at those results, which you would expect, and it begins to push the envelope a little bit on search itself. And so that's what we've got. So assuming we'll pull this a link to this into ZenHub fairly quickly, which Sammy has probably already done already. That's what we've got. So any questions or comments on this one before we get to an estimate?
I do want to comment that when we went over this yesterday with Bar Green and Salmia, with you absent, I just want to catch you up to date. We observed that so far we have not had a lot of sort of swipe interaction, and Salmia was like, it's unclear how to differentiate. Well, I'll put it in order because they first posed the problem. It's unclear how to differentiate between dismissing the search results and clearing the search box. And we talked about it and raised the issue of the vocabulary of gestures that you can have. And it was observed that we talked about sort of discouraging use of gestures at this early stage, and that kind of that does kind of limit us. And I think originally it was Jimmy, who is going to be absent for a little while, who talked about it. But we want to make sure that gestures do make it into the product, and so at some point we will have use of that vocabulary. So we should keep that in mind as we design that stuff. Separately, there's definitely some inconsistencies in the available APIs that make this potentially an expensive query. So, there might be some optimization work to do, and I would factor that into the estimate.
Got it. What's your James? What's your best take on how much of this is covered via GraphQL versus something that would have to be REST at this point? Do we have a good sense of that? That's
actually a good question for the Bar Green folks. If you're doing pure product search, I know that GraphQL can do some amazing stuff. The trouble is that right now the schema does not allow you to supply all the variables that you want to have. So. I don't know what you guys have experienced so far at Bar Green, but, the search string works okay, right?
So I haven't messed around with the search too much, and the person who has Connor is not here today, so I can't really speak much to that.
All right, no worries.
Cool.
Bottom line is that the product details query, the same one that we use to actually fetch product detail, we do that by narrowing a query result down to one field. So all you do is just not do that. And there's a search string option, and then there's a filter option for more advanced stuff that right now I don't think it's ready for prime time. So MVP would just be use the search string. It's pretty straightforward, but I don't know how performant it's going to be.
Got it. Yeah, this one will just have to factor in a little bit of ambiguity on it. This is clearly, I'll go out on the limb and say it's probably not a one-pointer by that one. But yeah, search is always going to be a little bit tricky. And also just to be, full disclosure in terms of priorities, I think my intent for putting this one in today's grooming was to start bundling a more complete search experience. But to be honest, as we look at assignments for these, there's other areas that we would definitely want beforehand. So it's just, this one's more about logical grouping with the existing search work. Of course, this is great. Beyond that, but also the assumption I'm making is this could be bundled in with the existing search work as well. But again, if push comes to shove, not that we're pushing or shoving in any ways, but we want to make sure that we can. There are other areas to tackle first for that one. So I just want to note that one. ZenHub doesn't do a great job at prioritization per se, but I just want to note that as we look to assignments for this one. So.
Sure.
Cool. All right. So I made an update, James, on gestures to be considered in the future. So I think we'll have that one and just make that noted. So we'll come back around to that. And then I think we've got some, again, covering some of the API ambiguity, at least on the first task for this. And so just looking into that is going to be a big part. Anything else we need to cover before jumping to estimates? All right. Very good. All right. So let's go ahead to estimates then. What's our thinking on this one?
Feels like a 5 to an 8 to me. I would estimate it as an 8 to be frank.
Yep. Can we get a second on the 8?
I'll second
Right.
that
Calcum
8.
a second on the 8. Paul, was that you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was me.
All right. I agree relative to our other ones here. We generally look at things that are broken down in the 3s and 5s. This one's gonna be a bigger one, and that's fine. So this will be a sizable one. So let's mark that as an 8. So perfect. All right, and then this one, and then as an offline item, I'll follow up with Samia to update the concept in this. I think this one's okay, but I think we're going to replace the other one with what she was working on behind the scenes. So making that assumption, we'll clean that up, and then this one also will be ready for start. So perfect. That's 3 done. So so that's our intent for today. So I had those 3 pre-groomed. We've got roughly a half hour ahead of us here if we want to cover anything else. There are always things to cover. James, not sure if there's any DevX stories you had top of mind that would be worth covering with this group, or if we just want to call it a session and come back and kind of get back to with what we're doing. So anything else you'd like to add or take care of?
We need to pre-groom, I think, before we can talk about this productively. But I think we definitely want, I think we definitely want to continue to iterate on upward documentation. And I also think that we should record some work that James Kalkman did and is continuing to do, which I guess we can backdate into a story that was being done. Is Jimothy here?
Yeah, I'm here.
So we should have a story for all the cool stuff you're doing with the REST API scheme.
Okay, yeah.
Because that's real stuff. So Eric, yeah, I mean, the REST APIs are necessary to fill in the gaps, but the story for gaining access to full REST API documentation in Magento is very strange for the uninitiated, and you require an instance, and it's not great. And right now it's a gap in the current
tokens and good things either.
Cool. No, I think it's a good suggestion, James. We often overlook documentation on this, and if you guys wanted to put together just a quick straw man, James, just at least to cover the intention of that one,
okay,
and maybe we can review it quickly on Slack and get an estimate around that. Yeah, I agree with it. It's large enough that it needs to be considered, but I think also as part of this larger forum, would love to continue getting your feedback from Art and from Paul and others, just to make sure we've got their bases covered. So, but yeah, let's kind of pre-groom it asynchronously, and then we'll send it out to the masses for review.
There's one thing I'd like to do.
Yeah.
Are you still sharing your screen?
I'm not. I can do that though.
There's a wiki page I created for EPAM about documentation.
Oh, cool.
I think community would also be interested in that.
Cool. Did you want to share it?
I thought that you were already sharing, but
all right. I'm just not going to have the link as readily available. So
it's Are you sharing around?
I'm not. I'm off share
Okay,
now. So
share.
give us just a second. James is going to share a screen on the wiki page. So.
All right.
Side note: Rowan intended to join from the airport as he comes back from Magento Live Europe, but he sends his regrets. He'll catch up on video.
You guys see my screen?
We can.
Yep. So I have some documentation guidelines. When Eric says testing documentation, I think this is a good set of guidelines for generating documentation. Where I expect them to go, and what kind of documentation I expect, whether it's a UI component or a feature or a implementation. I think this would be a good place to look at to see what that means when Eric says testing documentation.
Right. And what we can do also is we can put a link to that. Now that we have a good example there, we can put a link to that in the stories. That way people don't have to hunt around for it. That might be helpful.
Put in the issue itself.
Yeah.
So I can click into it.
Perfect. I can do that with the new ones there.
Yeah. So just in case you were wondering, it's in the wiki and one of the pages here.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Excellent. Well, it sounds like the all that we had the least to cover for today. Anything else? Any other questions, comments, or suggestions before we break?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, hey, thank you so much, everybody. Great to be back. Thank you again for joining us and for knocking out 3 stories and rapid fire. So we'll have a bigger list for next week based on the progress we made this time around. And again, as always, appreciate everybody's support. Have a great rest of your day and evening, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. I'll see you soon.
All right. Take care. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.